Have you ever wondered what it really means to be seen? To be recognized not just for what you appear to be, but for the battles you fought and the dignity you carry inside? Today's story is about a man who sat quietly in a diner, but whose simple act of presence ignited a powerful movement for respect and justice. This isn't just a story, it's a call to look closer, listen deeper, and stand stronger for those who are often overlooked. If you believe in stories that inspire real change, hit that like button, share and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that remind us of the human spirit's strength. To everyone who's already joined our community, we pray for your good health, ease in all your endeavors, freedom from debt, solutions to every difficulty you face, healing for those who are sick, and abundant blessings in every part of your life. May you be surrounded by peace and prosperity always. And we want to hear from you. What does being truly seen mean in your life? Drop a comment below and let's start a conversation that matters. The small cafe on Orange Blossom Trail had never made the news. Not once. It wasn't that kind of place. With its chipped turquoise booths, humming ceiling fan, and a hand-painted chalkboard menu, Rita's Cafe was the sort of spot you only found if someone told you about it. Locals came for the biscuits and stayed for the gossip. Tourists passed it by without a second glance. But on Tuesday mornings around 7:45, one customer always arrived like clockwork. Elias Reed pushed through the glass door with its dangling silver bell and made his way to the same booth by the window, second from the back, just beyond the coffee station. He wore a faded army jacket, sleeves rolled back to the wrist, the name patch long removed. His steps were careful, deliberate. Years of marching across sand and stone had taken their toll. He carried a paperback in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other. No phone. Never a phone. "Morning, Mr. Reed," called out Rita from behind the counter. She was already pouring his usual, black coffee, no sugar. "Your seat's open." Elias nodded, barely lifting his eyes. "Appreciate you," he said, settling in. The booth's cushion let out a soft hiss as he lowered himself, easing into the corner. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, throwing soft lines across his face. "You like this seat?" It let him see the street, the door, the people. And people usually didn't see him. Until that morning. At 8:03, the cafe door opened again. Two uniformed officers walked in, glancing around like they were already late for something. Officer Jennings was tall, sharp-chinned, and carried himself like every room owed him respect. His partner, Officer Sandler, looked younger, more hesitant, but not enough to matter. Their eyes landed on Elias. "You good?" Rita asked Elias softly, noticing the shift in the air. Elias didn't answer. He sipped his coffee. The officers walked straight to his booth. "Sir," Jennings said, resting a hand on the table like he owned it. "We got a call about a suspicious individual loitering here. Mind showing some ID?" Elias raised an eyebrow. "I come here every Tuesday," he replied calmly. "Let's see that ID," Jennings said again, voice colder this time. Rita stepped around the counter. "He's a regular. Been coming here for years. You sure you got the right guy?" Jennings didn't look at her. "Ma'am, please step back." Elias reached slowly into his jacket and placed a worn wallet on the table. He opened it, revealing a Veterans Affairs card. "This good enough?" Sandler leaned in, squinting at the photo, but Jennings didn't move. "You have a driver's license?" Elias stared at him. Then he reached for his phone. "I'm calling someone." "You do that," Jennings muttered. Rita looked on, frozen. The whole cafe had gone quiet. The line rang once, twice. "Sorrel?" answered the voice on the other end. "It's Elias," Elias said. "I'm at Rita's." There was a pause. "They're here?" "Yeah." "I'll handle it," said the voice. "Stay seated." Elias ended the call. Jennings scoffed. "You think calling a buddy's gonna change anything?" Elias didn't answer. He looked out the window. 3 minutes later, the bell over the door jingled again. A man in a dark blue blazer stepped in. No badge, no uniform, just presence. He moved like someone who didn't need to explain himself. "Good morning," he said to the officers. "I'm Deputy Chief Marlowe." Jennings straightened. "Sir?" Marlowe didn't smile. "I was told there was an incident here." Rita pointed. "He's bothering Mr. Reed." Marlowe walked over to Elias. "Mr. Reed, you okay?" Elias nodded once. "For now." Marlowe turned to the officers. "You're dismissed. I'll take it from here." Jennings hesitated. "But sir." "I said dismissed." The two officers left, tension thick in their wake. Marlowe sat down across from Elias. "I'm sorry. This shouldn't have happened." Elias stirred his coffee. "But it did." "I'll be in touch," Marlowe said quietly, and then he stood and left. The cafe buzzed back to life slowly, like someone unpausing a movie. Rita brought over a fresh plate of eggs and toast. "On the house," she whispered. Elias looked at the food, then at the window. Outside, a teenage girl had been standing across the street, phone raised, recording everything. He didn't know it yet, but the quiet corner booth would not be quiet much longer. He didn't know that before the eggs cooled, his name would be everywhere. He didn't know that Florida and then the country was about to say his name out loud. For the first time in a long time. Across the street from Rita's cafe, 17-year-old Alea Coleman stood with her phone held steady, her thumb hovering over the record button until she was sure the moment needed to be kept. She had been walking to school, earbuds in, sipping a lukewarm iced coffee when she spotted the two officers entering the cafe. At first she kept walking, but something in their posture made her turn back. Something about the way they moved around the old man in the window booth. She didn't know who he was, but she knew what she saw. Her phone caught it all. The confrontation, the sharp tone in the taller officer's voice, the stillness in the man's face, the tension in the room, and then the arrival of the man in the blazer who made the uniforms retreat like tide from shore. Alea stopped recording as the deputy chief stepped back out, his face unreadable. She slipped her phone into her backpack and hurried toward the school, her heart tight and her mind already racing. She didn't know what she would do with the video. Not yet. But she knew it wasn't staying buried in her camera roll. That afternoon she uploaded it. No caption. Just, "This happened at Rita's Cafe in Orlando this morning." By nightfall it had over 30,000 views. By dawn it had over 500,000. And Elias Reed, the man in the booth, had a name again. Elias didn't own a television. He didn't keep Wi-Fi in his apartment. He read paperbacks from the library and walked 3 blocks every day to get his mail from a steel box that leaned to the right. The first sign that something had shifted came when he walked into the pharmacy and the cashier nodded at him a little too long. "You're the guy," she said. He looked at her. "The one from the video," she added. "Rita's Cafe, right?" He frowned slightly but said nothing. By the time he reached the cafe the next morning, Rita was waiting with an envelope in her hand. "This came for you," she said, sliding it across the counter. "Dropped off by someone from Channel 6. Inside was a letter inviting Elias to appear on a local morning show. They wanted to talk to him about what had happened. They said the community wanted to hear his story. There was a gift card tucked into the fold, $50 to a nearby grocery store. Elias handed the envelope back. "Not interested." Rita didn't argue. She simply nodded and poured his coffee. "You're gonna need to decide soon," she said. "People are starting to care." Outside, a reporter waited in a car. Across the street, someone had scrawled "Justice for Elias" on a power pole in chalk. Down the block, a group of teenagers were watching the cafe windows with hushed voices. Elias sat in his usual booth, but the peace was gone. Meanwhile, Alea couldn't sleep. The video had done more than she imagined. She'd received messages from news outlets, advocacy groups, and strangers thanking her. But also threats. Ugly ones. Ones that made her turn off location sharing and keep her phone face down at school. Her mother, Carla, a nurse at St. Vincent's, warned her. "You did something good, but the world doesn't always treat it that way." "I didn't do it to be famous," Alea said. "I just didn't want them to erase him." Carla nodded. "Then you need to be smart about what comes next." What came next arrived faster than either of them expected. At City Hall, a community meeting was called within days. The mayor's office was flooded with calls. The officers from the video were placed on administrative leave pending review. And then came the questions. Who was Elias Reed? Why was a veteran treated like a threat? What did this say about the city? A retired social worker named Lucille Hartwell organized a small rally outside Rita's cafe. Dozens came with signs, chanting not in anger but in honor. "Respect is not optional," read one. "Elias is all of us," read another. Inside the cafe, Elias watched from the window. He sipped his coffee slower than usual. Rita leaned on the counter. "They're not going away." "I know," Elias murmured. "You ever think about telling your story?" she asked. "Not the viral kind. The real one." He looked at her. She pointed toward the street. "They're listening now." That evening, Elias sat in his apartment with a spiral notebook and a pen. He stared at the blank page. The walls were quiet, the shadows long. He began to write. "My name is Elias Reed. I served in Iraq and came back with more questions than medals. I have lived quietly because I believed that was safer. But now maybe silence isn't enough." He paused. Then he kept writing. Outside, the streetlights blinked on. The night began again. But something had shifted. The man beside the window was no longer invisible. The small studio on the west side of Orlando didn't look like much. It was wedged between a laundromat and a pawn shop, its sign faded by sun and time. But inside, the air buzzed with energy. WPRF was a local public radio station with a modest reach, but its Sunday morning show, Voices of the Neighborhood, had a loyal audience across Central Florida. That morning, host Daryl Vance sat behind the microphone, headphones snug around his ears, watching the second chair with anticipation. His producer gave a thumbs up. The door opened. Elias Reed stepped in. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if his bones were remembering a different rhythm. He wore a crisp shirt, pressed slacks, and the same well-worn shoes he wore to the cafe each day. His presence filled the room not by volume but by gravity. "Mr. Reed," Daryl said, standing to shake his hand. "Thank you for coming." Elias nodded. "Appreciate the invitation." They settled in. The red light clicked on. The theme music faded. Daryl leaned toward the mic. "Good morning, folks. Today on Voices of the Neighborhood, we're joined by a man whose name has recently become known to many, but whose story stretches far beyond a few viral seconds. Mr. Elias Reed, thank you for being here." Elias cleared his throat. "I wasn't looking to be known. Just to be left in peace." "That's fair," Daryl said. "But maybe now's the time to share a little." And so he did. He spoke softly but clearly. He talked about growing up in Tallahassee, about enlisting at 18, about the heat and confusion of desert patrols that never made the news. He talked about the men he lost, the silence he carried back, and the struggle to find something ordinary when nothing inside felt that way. He spoke about finding the booth at Rita's Cafe, how it became a place where he didn't have to pretend. A place where no one asked him to explain the past or justify the way he stared out the window for minutes at a time. When Daryl gently brought up the video, Elias paused. "What did you feel in that moment?" Daryl asked. Elias's voice didn't waver. "I felt tired. Not scared. Not angry. Just tired. Like I'd lived that scene a dozen times before, and each time it ended the same way, with me having to prove I wasn't a threat." A long silence settled between them. Then Daryl said, "There's a lot of people listening who see themselves in you." Elias didn't smile. But he looked into the soundproof glass, as if the people he couldn't see were somehow more real now. "I didn't ask for attention," he said. "But maybe attention isn't the worst thing, if it helps us remember what we keep trying to forget." Back at home, Alea sat in the kitchen with her laptop open and her earbuds in. She listened to every word of the interview twice. Her notebook, normally used for chemistry notes, was now filled with lines she copied down. Quotes from Elias. Words she didn't want to lose. Her mother sat across from her, flipping through a magazine but not really reading. "You thinking of reaching out to him?" Carla asked. Alea hesitated. "I don't know. I don't want to mess anything up." Carla looked at her daughter. "You didn't mess anything up. You made sure the truth didn't get buried." Alea nodded. Still, the weight of it all pressed on her. She had filmed something powerful, yes, but now she wondered what her responsibility was after the moment had passed. 3 days later, a letter arrived at Rita's Cafe addressed to Elias. It was from a high school in the north part of town. Inside was a short note. "Dear Mr. Reed, we heard you speak on the radio. Our social studies class is learning about civic engagement. Would you be willing to visit us and talk about your experience? With respect, Ms. Nina Bell in Class 11B." Rita handed it to him with his usual coffee. "You gonna answer?" Elias stared at the envelope. "Not sure I've got anything to teach." "You've already taught them something. They just want to say thank you." He read the letter again. Then he folded it carefully and slid it into his jacket pocket. "I'll think about it." By the end of the week, 3 more letters arrived. One from a veterans group. Another from a local journalist. The last one came with a small package, a framed print of a painting. It showed a man sitting by a window, sunlight pouring in. The figure was faceless but unmistakably him. The note attached read, "You reminded us that dignity is quiet, but it can still be seen." Elias didn't say much when he opened it. But that evening when he returned home, he took down the only picture on his wall, a faded landscape of a Florida swamp, and hung the new piece in its place. He stood there, arms crossed, looking at it, not quite at peace, but no longer invisible. Elias Reed sat on the edge of his bed, staring down at the polished shoes beside his feet. They gleamed like they hadn't in years. Outside, the Florida sun was already sharp, streaking through the blinds and heating the floorboards of his modest apartment. A breeze stirred the curtain. carrying the distant sound of traffic and children laughing as they walked to school. In his hands, Elias held the folded letter again, the one from Ms. Nina Bell in Class 11B. He'd read it dozens of times. He wasn't a man of speeches. He didn't do crowds. But something about those students asking, not demanding, not begging, just asking with respect, struck him deeply. He'd spent so much of his life being told what to do, or worse, being dismissed. This was different. They saw him. And so, he had decided to go. At Northgate High, the bell rang with a shrill echo through the halls. Classroom doors opened and closed. Sneakers squeaked across tile floors. In room 214, the students of Class 11B buzzed with anticipation. Desks had been rearranged into a wide semicircle. A chair was placed at the front. Ms. Bell smoothed her blouse, straightened a folder on her desk, and nodded as a figure appeared in the doorway. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," she said warmly. Elias stepped in. The room fell silent. He wore the same dark shirt from the radio interview, slacks pressed sharp at the crease, and those polished shoes that caught the sun from the windows. He looked around, took a slow breath, and nodded at the class. "Morning." There was a pause as he scanned the room. A few students offered shy smiles. One boy raised a hand slightly in greeting. A girl near the back sat up straighter, eyes wide. Alea was not in this school, but her video had been passed from phone to phone, watched and rewatched until the man beside the window felt like someone they all knew. Elias sat down in the empty chair. It creaked slightly beneath him. His hands rested on his knees. "I'm not much for speeches," he said, "but I was asked to talk about what happened. So I will." He spoke simply. He told them about the cafe, the booth he always sat in, the morning a man had wrongly accused him, and the girl who had caught it all on video. He told them about the silence in that room, the heat that flushed his face, the way the world seemed to go still when no one believed him, except one. Then he talked about his past. Not all of it, just the parts that shaped him. He spoke of boot camp, of letters that never got answered, of the long desert nights and the strange quiet that followed when he came back. He told them that he had learned how to keep still so that nothing inside him would break loose. The students listened. No one whispered. No one scrolled through a phone. Every eye was on him. At the end he looked up. "I'm not here to tell you what to think," Elias said. "But I want you to know this. You don't have to be loud to make a difference. Sometimes just noticing what others ignore is enough to change something. Or someone." A hand went up, a girl with braids and a notebook open on her lap. "Did you ever think people would listen to you?" she asked. Elias took a moment. "No," he said. "But I showed up anyway." Another student, a boy with a worn hoodie, leaned forward. "Were you scared when the guy at the cafe accused you?" Elias nodded slowly. "I was used to fear. But that morning what I felt was something else. I felt tired. Tired of proving I belonged." A third student, seated by the window, raised her hand. "Do you think we can change things?" He looked at her, then around the room. "I think you already are." After the visit, Ms. Bell walked Elias to the parking lot. "You didn't have to come," she said. "But I'm glad you did." Elias gave a faint smile. They were worth the walk. She extended her hand, but Elias did something different. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small silver pin, a worn, circular medallion, scratched from age. It was the badge he'd been given after his final deployment, back when his hands were still steady and his knees didn't ache. "I'd like you to keep this," he said. Ms. Bell hesitated. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "For the next student who forgets they matter." Word of Elias's classroom visit spread quietly but steadily. More invitations followed, community centers, youth groups, a library in Sanford. He didn't accept all of them. He wasn't trying to be a speaker. But he accepted enough. Enough to let his story take root in places where it could grow. One evening, back at Rita's cafe, he sat in his usual booth, watching the light fall across the parking lot. Rita brought him his tea without asking. "You did good, Elias," she said. He didn't look away from the window. "I just told the truth." "And that," she replied, "is a kind of courage." She left him to his thoughts. Outside, the street was quiet, the sun dipping low behind the trees. A boy walked past on the sidewalk, dragging a skateboard beside him. He glanced into the cafe and gave Elias a small nod. Elias nodded back. The booth felt no different. But somehow, everything around it had changed. 2 weeks after his visit to Northgate High, Elias found himself walking a path he had avoided for years. The brick walkway through Memorial Grove stretched ahead, flanked by polished granite slabs engraved with the names of local veterans. Spanish moss draped from the ancient oaks above, their shadows dappling the ground in patches of gold and gray. He moved slowly. Not from pain, though there was some of that, but from memory. Memorial Grove was a place of reverence in Clearwater Springs. Families came here to trace names with trembling fingers. Teenagers were brought by history teachers to be reminded of sacrifice. Old men came alone, tipping their hats toward etched names they once shouted beside in desert heat or jungle rain. Elias had not been here in over a decade. He paused at a bench, adjusting his cap. On it, stitched in muted thread, were the words, "Quiet Strength." A gift from one of the students. He had worn it every day since. "Mr. Reed?" The voice came from behind. He turned to see a young man in a military uniform, neat, formal, yet familiar in the way that posture gave away more than cloth ever could. Behind him stood a small group, 2 city officials, a woman with a clipboard, and an older gentleman with a camera slung across his chest. "Yes," Elias said. "I'm Corporal Miles Santos. I serve with the Florida Guard. We're organizing this year's Veterans Day ceremony. I was hoping, we were hoping, you might lead the opening march." Elias's brow furrowed. "I'm no Grand Marshal," he said. "You are now," the city official said gently, stepping forward. "Mr. Reed, your story has reached more people than you know. Young folks, veterans, civilians. You've reminded people what dignity looks like. Not in speeches, in presence. We want you to be part of this." Elias looked at the path again, at the long rows of stone. He didn't answer right away, but a few minutes later he agreed. On the morning of the ceremony, the streets of Clearwater Springs were alive with motion. Flags fluttered from porch railings. Children with paper poppies pinned to their shirts lined the sidewalks. Local news trucks set up at intersections, and the park near Memorial Grove buzzed with folding chairs and murmuring voices. At exactly 10:45 a.m., the honor guard assembled at the mouth of the grove. Elias stood at the front. He wore a crisp navy blazer. Not new but cared for. The Quiet Strength cap rested on his head. His medals were few, tucked neatly against his chest, earned in silence, not ceremony. Behind him marched 24 veterans, each in their own style of uniform, their own rhythm of stride. The drums began, slow, deliberate. With a steady step, Elias moved forward. The crowd along the walkway rose to their feet. Some applauded. Others simply placed hands over hearts. A boy on his father's shoulders pointed toward Elias and whispered something, eyes wide. As he passed the engraved stones, Elias did not lower his head. He did not bow or salute. He simply looked, and in doing so, honored every name without a word. At the center of the grove, the march ended. The microphone stood unused. There were prepared speeches, but the crowd had already fallen into a respectful hush. Elias turned slowly to face them. "I don't have much to add," he said. His voice was soft but carried. "Except that I didn't expect to be here. Not at the front. Not at all." He let the words rest a moment. "But I'm grateful. And I'm still learning. Some wounds don't close in silence. They need light. They need others. I've spent a long time beside windows watching people live. I'm learning to step through the door." There was no applause at first, just quiet. Then slowly it came. Gentle. Real. In the crowd, Rita wiped her eyes. Beside her, Ms. Bell stood with several of her students, who had made the early trip across town just to be there. Alea, still holding her camera, filmed without a word. Her lens stayed on Elias as he took a deep breath and looked out over the gathered faces. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. But he stood. And that was enough. Later that evening, Elias returned to the cafe. It was quiet again, as it always was after a long day. He sat by the window, hands wrapped around a warm cup. Outside, the streetlight flickered. A cat darted across the sidewalk. And from a nearby apartment window, faint music drifted into the air. A trumpet playing low and steady, like a soldier's lullaby. He sipped his tea. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged not just to a place, but to a moment. And it was a good one. Alea Rivera hadn't intended to become a documentarian. She had studied journalism because she believed in stories, the kind people overlooked, the kind buried beneath everyday noise. But nothing in her coursework or internships had prepared her for what happened after the footage of Elias Reed went viral. A camera had been running in the corner of the cafe that day. It was her camera, placed innocuously by the plant stand, half forgotten while she sipped her coffee and reviewed transcripts on her laptop. She hadn't meant to record anything, not at first. But when the voices rose and the accusation cut through the room, her hand had instinctively reached for the record button. She had debated whether to post it. 3 days of thinking. of wondering if it would do more harm than good, of worrying it would reduce Elias to a symbol when he clearly wanted none of that. But in the end she shared it. Not with fanfare. Not with commentary. Just the clip and the words. This is Elias Reed. He sat beside the window. He kept his dignity when others didn't. The internet did the rest. Now, weeks later, she was back in Clearwater Springs, holding a camera once again, only this time by invitation. "You sure he'll say yes?" asked her producer, a soft-spoken man named Reggie who had driven down from Jacksonville. "I'm not sure," Alea admitted, "but I think he understands what this means now." They stood outside the cafe just after opening. A breeze carried the smell of fresh pastries. Inside, the morning crowd shuffled past the register. Retirees, teachers on break, a couple of high schoolers sipping cold brew and pretending to study. Elias was already seated. Not at the corner today, but in the center. Rita moved between tables with a practiced rhythm, nodding toward Alea when she entered. "Good to see you," Elias said as she approached. "May I sit?" He gestured to the empty chair. Reggie sat up across the room, angled just enough to frame Elias without intruding. He checked light levels. Audio levels. Alea didn't need notes. She already knew the questions. She'd spent weeks refining them, cutting through everything unnecessary. She hit record. "Mr. Reed," she said, "when did you know that moment in the cafe would change things?" Elias exhaled, his hands resting lightly on the table. "I didn't," he said. "Not at first. At first, I thought it was just another moment to forget. Another reason to sit quietly. But you didn't stay quiet. I was tired of disappearing." Alea nodded, her voice gentle. "Why do you think people connected with your story?" Elias glanced toward the window. The same one from that day. Light streamed through it, illuminating the dust in the air. Because they saw something they recognized. Not me, not exactly. But the silence. The pause. The choice to breathe instead of explode. That's not weakness. That's what a lot of us live with every day. He looked at her now, eyes steady. People want to be seen. Not for their pain, but for their peace. A pause passed between them. "Do you mind if I ask one more?" she said. He nodded. "What do you want to happen next?" This time Elias smiled. "I want the next old man sitting by a window to be left in peace. I want the next kid who walks into a place like this not to be feared. And I want folks to remember that stillness isn't absence. Sometimes it's where the loudest stories live." Alea stopped the recording. Reggie lowered his camera. For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of conversation, the sound of plates clinking gently behind the counter. Then Rita came by and topped off Elias's tea. "Your usual," she said. Elias raised the cup. "To the camera in the window," he said softly, "and the one who dared to point it." Alea felt her throat tighten, but she managed a smile. To the story that found its voice. Outside, cars rolled by, unaware of the small, quiet moment unfolding inside. But somewhere beyond, a screen would flicker. A clip would play. And someone would see Elias Reed not just as a symbol, but as a man who chose to remain whole in a world eager to break him. The days after the interview unfolded with a strange mix of calm and urgency. Alea's story on Elias Reed had been shared widely, featured on local news, picked up by independent journalists, and slowly finding its way into national conversations about dignity, respect, and the quiet struggles that too many overlooked. But for Elias, life settled into a new kind of rhythm. The spotlight was still there, but it felt different now. Less invasive, more like a gentle spotlight guiding people towards something they hadn't wanted to face before. One morning, as he walked through the neighborhood near his small apartment, Elias noticed subtle changes. The corner store owner smiled when he passed by. A young mother stopped to chat, asking about his health and his plans for the weekend. At the bus stop, a group of teenagers nodded with respect instead of avoidance. It wasn't fame. It was something more fragile and profound. Acknowledgement. At the community center, where Elias had volunteered for years without much notice, the staff approached him with invitations to speak, to share his story with local youth. They saw in him a beacon, not of grandeur but of survival, resilience, and quiet power. Meanwhile, Alea stayed busy with the fallout of her piece. Calls from editors. Requests for follow-up interviews. Messages from veterans, homeless advocates, and everyday people who found courage in Elias's calm strength. She spent an afternoon at the shelter where Elias had spent some of his hardest nights, talking with staff and residents, learning more about the unseen battles fought behind closed doors. The story was bigger than a single man. It was a reflection of a system failing too many, a society turning blind eyes. At the same time, Elias worked quietly on his own healing. The housing voucher from the VA had turned into a small apartment down the street. Simple, but his. It had a window that caught the morning sun just right. Sometimes he would sit there, letting the light warm his face as he thought about the path ahead. One evening, as the sky melted into hues of pink and orange, Elias found himself walking back to the cafe. It was closing time, but a few regulars lingered, sipping last cups of coffee and sharing stories. Rita saw him and waved. "Come on in," she said. "We've saved your usual seat." Inside, Elias took his place by the window again. The familiar sounds and smells wrapped around him like an old friend. Alea was there too, finishing a quiet dinner. When she saw him, she raised her cup in a silent toast. Elias smiled and lifted his own. The moment felt like a promise, that some stories, though quiet, have the power to ripple far beyond the places where they begin. That respect and understanding could grow one small act at a time. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, and the city moved forward. But inside the cafe, time seemed to pause, a small sanctuary for a man who had finally found his seat at the table. The morning sun spilled through the dusty windows of the shelter, casting long beams of light across the worn linoleum floors. Elias woke slowly, the familiar aches in his joints a reminder of years spent carrying burdens most people couldn't see. Today felt different though, not because of the aches but because of the quiet weight of change pressing against his chest. He pulled on his worn jacket, the fabric softened from years of use, and stepped outside. The neighborhood was waking up, sounds of children laughing and cars passing by drifting on the humid Florida air. He took a deep breath, feeling the saltiness of the nearby ocean breeze mixing with the promise of possibility. At the community center, a small crowd had gathered. Today was the first day Elias was scheduled to speak to a group of teenagers from a local high school. It wasn't a speech he'd written or rehearsed, just a conversation, a chance to share what it meant to be seen and to be invisible. The room filled slowly with restless energy. Some of the kids slouched in their chairs, others whispered to friends, but all eyes turned toward Elias when he walked in. He didn't rush to speak. Instead, he scanned the room, letting the silence stretch until it felt natural. Then he began. "I didn't ask for attention," he said, voice steady. "I wanted to be treated like a person. Not a problem. Not a story. Just a person." He told them about the mornings spent sitting quietly in the cafe, about the long nights at the shelter, about the battles he fought long before the world started watching. There were no grand speeches or heroic declarations, just simple truths laid bare. The teenagers listened. Some nodded, others looked away, but the room held a quiet reverence that surprised him. Afterward, a young girl approached, her eyes bright. "Thank you for sharing," she said softly. "I think I see things a little differently now." Elias smiled, feeling the fragile power of connection. Meanwhile, in the background, the ripple effect continued. Local officials met quietly behind closed doors, pressured by growing calls for better veteran services and homelessness programs. The police department had started reviewing protocols, and community groups organized events inspired by Elias's story. But not everyone welcomed the changes. Some dismissed the attention as fleeting. Others whispered that Elias was making trouble by speaking out. Still, the light that had been sparked refused to be dimmed. That evening, Elias returned to the cafe, the place where it all began. He sat at his usual booth, the one by the window, and sipped his coffee slowly. Around him, the world moved in its usual chaotic rhythm, but for a moment, everything felt centered. Carla, the waitress who had always treated him with quiet kindness, approached with a knowing smile. "You've got people listening now," she said. Elias nodded. Maybe it's time they did. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars brought down to earth. The shadows of the past lingered, but so did the light, fragile, persistent, and growing. Elias's apartment was small but neat, tucked away in a quiet part of town where the palm trees swayed gently and the hum of distant traffic faded into the background. He sat on the edge of his bed, a worn photograph resting in his hands. It showed a group of soldiers, young men, faces serious, eyes hardened by experiences most people could never understand. Among them was Elias, younger, but with that same quiet strength that still defined him. He thought about the men he'd lost, the friends who never made it home, whose stories were buried deep beneath layers of silence and time. Their names weren't shouted in headlines or splashed across social media. They were ghosts, forgotten by a world that had moved on. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Sorrel, the nonprofit worker who had helped him navigate the sudden attention. It was simple: meeting tomorrow. Important. Elias didn't ask questions. He knew that this new chapter in his life was demanding more of him, more than he thought he could give. The next day, at a modest conference room in a community center, Elias sat surrounded by social workers, city officials, and veterans. The room buzzed with talk of new programs, housing vouchers, mental health services. But beneath the hopeful conversations was a current of tension. One city official leaned forward, voice clipped. "We can't make promises we can't keep. Budgets are tight and public opinion shifts like the tide." Elias listened, his jaw tight. He had seen how bureaucracy could swallow hope, how words could become empty gestures. But he also saw the faces around him, people willing to listen even if cautiously. When it was his turn to speak, Elias stood slowly, the weight of years pressing on his shoulders. "I'm not here to ask for charity," he said. "I'm here to ask for dignity, for respect, for a place where veterans like me aren't invisible, where our struggles don't go ignored until they become a headline." There was silence. Then a woman from the Veterans Outreach nodded, her eyes shining. "That's the conversation we need to have." Back at the cafe, life continued to change. Harold and Carla noticed new faces, people coming not just for breakfast but for connection. The booth Elias always sat in became a quiet symbol, a reminder that every person had a story worth hearing. One afternoon, a local reporter stopped by, hoping to catch a moment with Elias. But he was nowhere to be found. Instead, the reporter found Harold, who simply said, "He's out there making sure those stories get told." That night, Elias sat on the porch of his small apartment, the humid air thick around him. He thought about how far he'd come, from silent mornings at a diner to being a reluctant voice for those too often unheard. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling up into the dark sky. The world was changing, slowly, fragilely, but changing nonetheless. And Elias was no longer invisible. Sunday morning arrived soft and warm, the kind of Florida day where the sun peeked through cottony clouds and the scent of salt and blooming jasmine lingered in the air. The cafe was quieter than usual, no flashing cameras, no microphones, just the familiar clink of coffee cups and low murmurs of conversation. The regulars had returned, the people who came for Harold's fluffy scrambled eggs and Carla's no-nonsense chatter. Elias Reed walked through the door wearing the same faded army jacket he had on the day everything changed. But today, something about his posture was different. Not stiff or proud, just steady, present, grounded. He scanned the room with calm eyes, taking in the faces that had come and gone since the viral video. Harold caught his glance and nodded toward the usual booth, the one by the window bathed in soft morning light. It was empty. Elias didn't sit. Instead, he cleared his throat, and the cafe's hum slowed to silence. Carla spotted him first. "Mr. Reed," she said, setting down a tray carefully. "I've got something to say," Elias began, voice steady but low enough to draw everyone closer. The cafe quieted more, the regulars leaning in without realizing it. "I'm not a hero," he said, eyes sweeping the room. "I didn't plan to be a story. I came in for eggs and coffee like always, like I have every Tuesday for years." He looked at Harold, then Carla. "Y'all saw me, not as a problem, not as a project, but as a person." Turning toward the others, he said, "But some folks didn't. And maybe now that video got out, people are paying attention. That's good. But attention isn't the same as understanding." Heads nodded slowly. Someone lowered their fork. Carla wiped a tear quickly, trying to look casual. Elias tapped his chest lightly. "I wore this jacket in deserts far from here. I watched friends die in silence for a country that forgets us the moment we take it off. I didn't ask for praise. I asked for a seat. I didn't demand a parade. Just a plate." His voice was calm, but every word landed like a hammer. "I still had to prove I belong." He stepped forward, facing the room with quiet conviction. "There are thousands like me. You won't see them on the news. You won't hear their names. Some are homeless. Some work hard jobs with aching knees and backs. Some have stopped talking because they're tired of being invisible." He held up a hand. "Hear this, being poor isn't a crime. Being tired isn't a weakness. Asking to be treated like a human being should never be met with suspicion." The room was silent except for a breath or two. Elias smiled gently. "We all walk into places carrying stories no one sees. So next time you see someone who looks like they don't belong, maybe they do. Maybe they belong more than you know." He nodded once, then finally took his seat. No applause followed. No need for it. Sometimes the loudest truths are spoken quietly. The morning wore on. People came and went, some leaving cash on Elias's table without a word. One woman handed him a handwritten letter and slipped away. Harold brought him another coffee without asking. Later that day, Elias walked to the shelter one last time. He packed the few belongings he'd kept, including the cold, heavy apartment key the VA had given him. It felt strange in his hand, a symbol of a new beginning. News stories faded over the week. The world found new stories to chase. But Elias did not move on. He planted roots in a neighborhood that finally saw him. Doors opened to greetings, not questions. He began volunteering at a local school, speaking to children about service, silence, and dignity. The staff didn't know quite how to introduce him. They simply said, "This is Mr. Reed. You'll want to listen." Because it turned out people were listening now. More importantly, they were looking, and they were seeing. Respect isn't something you earn only after you're gone. It should come while you're still here. So the next time you cross paths with someone who looks forgotten, speak. Don't stare. Listen. Don't assume. And when you can, stand up. Even if it's just by sitting down beside them. The end. 7 moral lessons drawn from this story. 1. The power of presence and recognition. In a world that often overlooks those who don't fit a certain image, simply being present and recognizing another person's humanity can be revolutionary. Elias's story shows us that sometimes the most profound form of respect is seeing someone as a person, not a stereotype or a problem. Presence is not just physical but emotional. Taking the time to truly see others can break down walls built by prejudice and misunderstanding. 2. Courage is not always loud. Heroism doesn't always roar. Elias didn't stand up with a speech or a grand gesture. His courage was quiet, sitting down when others expected him to be invisible, speaking truth in a calm voice, enduring disrespect without losing his dignity. This teaches us that courage can be quiet and steady, and that sometimes simply claiming your space peacefully is a radical act of bravery. 3. The invisible battles many fight. Behind every face, there are stories unseen, struggles with loss, pain, invisibility. Elias's story reminds us that many people carry burdens hidden from the public eye. Veterans coping with trauma, individuals struggling with homelessness, those fighting for respect in everyday life. Understanding this encourages empathy and patience toward those we might otherwise overlook. 4. The importance of justice and accountability. When wrongdoing happens, whether from individuals or institutions, silence allows injustice to persist. Elias's one phone call sparked a chain reaction because it broke the silence. The story highlights the power of speaking up and demanding accountability, showing that change often begins with a single voice refusing to accept injustice. 5. Respect must be given while people are still here. Often society waits until someone is gone to honor or respect them. Elias's story teaches that respect and recognition belong in the present. Acknowledging and valuing people while they are alive changes lives, offers healing and strengthens communities. It's a call to act now, not later. 6. True belonging is more than acceptance, it's being seen. Elias didn't just want to be tolerated, he wanted to belong. This story shows us that belonging means being seen for who you really are, with your history, struggles, and dignity intact. It's a reminder that true inclusion requires deeper understanding beyond surface-level acceptance. 7. Small actions can spark big change. From a single phone call to a viral video, small acts can grow into movements that shift minds and policies. Elias's story encourages us to recognize the ripple effect of everyday decisions. Standing up, even in small ways, like sitting beside someone or listening without judgment, can start important conversations and inspire transformation. These lessons invite us to reflect on how we engage with those around us and challenge us to act with empathy, courage, and integrity in everyday life. The story of Elias Reed is a powerful reminder that dignity and respect are not privileges but rights, and that each of us has the power to help make those rights real for everyone. Disclaimer: this story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real persons, places, or events is purely coincidental. The purpose of this story is to provide moral lessons, motivation, inspiration, and opportunities for personal growth and learning. Viewer discretion is advised. Thank you for listening to the story of Elias Reed, a quiet man who showed us the power of presence, courage, and dignity. Remember, respect isn't just given, it's earned by seeing and honoring each other's humanity, especially those who often go unnoticed. If this story moved you, please like the video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story that uplifts and inspires. Don't forget to leave a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences. Your voice matters here. May you carry the lessons of this story with you and find ways to stand beside those who need it most. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and stay hopeful.